Okay, last session of today. You're expecting CIM, OMI, and WMI from Jaap? Yeah? Yeah. Unfortunately, he's very ill and can't do it. So I'm standing in, and my name is Richard Siddaway, PowerShell MVP. I wrote PowerShell and WMI back in the day, and I'm just picking up this session. I've got his slides, his demo, just modified for my environment, and we'll see where we go. If you've got questions, let's make this interactive and have them as we go. We're going to look at the WMI and the CIM commandlets, how you can access methods, and a couple of tricks with remote connections with CIM commandlets. You've all used PowerShell remoting? Yeah? Anybody not? Have you used CIM sessions? Anybody not? Oh, that's going to make life easy. Excellent. If you look at the help for the WMI commandlets, they will tell you that they've been superseded by the CIM commandlets. They're still around. They're still supported. They're not really been developed, from what we can gather. And ultimately, I think they will be replaced by the CIM commandlets. They've not been actually officially deprecated yet, but I suspect it's only a matter of time. The CIM commandlets will probably, in most instances, give you better performance. There's a few issues with them in that because the default is for remote access is that they work over WS-man. You get inert objects with no methods, exactly the same as you do with PowerShell remoting. So with those caveats, the CIM commandlets are generally better than the WMI commandlets. And let's start looking at those. So the WMI commandlets, how many of you have not used the WMI commandlets? Anybody not? Oh. Be gone, young man, be gone. The getWMI object came around in PowerShell 1. It was the only method you had for accessing a remote computer. The other commandlets came along in PowerShell 2 and haven't really been changed since. The CIM commandlets came along in PowerShell 3. You've got a few more of them. Some of them work with CIM sessions, so the bottom three there are working for, bottom four are for working with CIM sessions. You can work with methods. You can delete CIM instances, which, if you try to delete a network adapter or a disk, could have interesting connotations for your machine. Anybody who wishes to try it, please feel free and email me the results. GetCim class is a great discovery mechanism for digging into the classes and finding out how they work, what the methods are, what parameters they need, the types on the methods, on the parameters for the methods, what the properties are. One thing with CIM is that a lot of the properties that you get back on a class are read-only. So working out which ones you can actually change and which ones you can't. One of the common questions on the forums is, I want to change X on such and such a class. And usually it turns out that they can't because it's read-only. Okay, so using them, if you Win32 BIOS is always a safe one for testing. And if you use getWMI object, you get the same sort of information back with getCim instance. Okay, trick question. Why does that work? I could also have done no, not aliases. Good guess, but not aliases. What actually happens is that the PowerShell, when it's looking for the command that you're typing in, if it as a final last gasp effort to run your command, it will put get hyphen in front of it and see if it can have a sensible result. Yeah? Did you not know that? Oh, you've learned something new. It was worth your while coming, even if you don't like CIM.
I didn't say that, but
Yes, you did. Didn't he?
yeah.
Yes. See?
If anyone used WMI object, and I said I tried to avoid it.
Oh, you're weaseling out of that now. Okay, one of the... No, I don't want to do that. Stop. I hate touchpads. Okay, one of the great issues with the WMI commandlets is this one. So dates. Year, month, day, hour, minute, second, fraction of a second, and a offset from Greenwich Mean Time. I'm still on English time, so I'm an hour ahead of Greenwich Mean Time, so that's 60 minutes. So if you got a German region on your machine, you'd actually be the other way. Okay, if you want to work with dates, there's a nice little pair of methods on all WMI objects. Convert to date time, convert from date time, and you can get it back. Better still, the CIM commandlets just do it for you. Makes life much easier. That's just to show that class is mandatory. WMI or CIM won't let you play unless you tell it a class. Okay. How many of you have looked in Root CIM v2 and seen that you get multiple classes? I think this will work. Yeah. If you look here. Okay. We've got a CIM operating system and a Win32 system. By the way, is this big enough for everybody? Yeah, okay. If it gets a bit small, let me know. The difference is this. That's the CIM class. That's the Win32 class. You seen the difference yet?
I remember SCOM offering a management agent for Linux, which also implemented CIM classes. So it would be strange to have Win32 on a Linux system.
Okay, you're getting close. Right, so I've got objects representing both of those. I've done compare object and nothing shows. That means that the objects are identical. What it is CIM, let's go back to this. CIM was invented, I hate ISE. Pardon? No, it's fine, thank you. I get even more confused with high technology like that. Okay, so CIM was invented in the 1990s by the Desktop Management Task Force, DMTF, which is one of the industry standard bodies. Microsoft were part of this, and they thought that CIM was great, so they implemented it, and Microsoft, being Microsoft, decided to call it WMI. Exactly the same thing. So if you look at the new commandlets that are called CIM, CIM equals WMI equals CIM. Just keep that in your mind. This one, the CIM underscore operating system, is the class as originally defined by, or currently defined by the DMTF. Win32 operating system is the Microsoft implementation of that class. It's an open standard. CIM is an open standard, which means that vendors can take it and they can take the base class and they can modify it, which is what Microsoft have done for some of the classes. For most of the common classes in root CIM v2, you will find a CIM version and a Win32 version. In most cases, they are identical. So why they did both? That's Microsoft back in the day. WMI was introduced back in the NT4 days with the NT4 option pack, if I remember correctly. The one class that they have not duplicated like this is CIM_datafile for working directly with files. It's the only one that I've seen that they have not duplicated. Nobody can tell me why they haven't duplicated it. My suspicion is that it got forgotten. Okay. So if we look at what comes back from the data. So if we use getWMI object to bring back a query, and have you all used WQL before? WMI query language. It's a very small subset of SQL. It's basically only for select. You can't do joins or anything like fancy like that unless you're using SCCM and the classes that SCCM introduces. Then you can do joins on WMI classes, which is just blew my mind the first time I saw that. If you look at what the CIM instance pulls back, it's slightly different. The difference is because you're getting different objects back, and in fact, let's show that. So if we look at that, you're getting system management object. If you look at this one, you're getting a Microsoft management infrastructure, which is part of the new CIM API. You also see a lot more properties. The CIM, sorry, let me start that again. The WMI commandlet, if you restrict the number of properties that you're pulling back, you will only see those properties on the returned object. The CIM commandlets will return everything, a full object, most of which the properties will not be populated. So if we do that, you see there's not much there to bring back. If you look at the CIM version of that, sorry, that's what I tried to do for changing this on the fly. Most of the things aren't populated. It's because the CIM commandlets are designed to work over WSMan and all of the serialization, deserialization. It has to work with the full object so that the serializer works properly. If you try to work with selected ones, it all falls apart when it gets back to the client machine and it hits the formatting system. So in terms of performance, okay, so get CIM instance. If we look at, you all use measure command? Great.
One more question about that bias query you did. So I see CIM operating system, but I'm seeing Win32 bias. Is there also for the bias like CIM representations by now?
Sorry.
So some classes have representations with CIM prefix now.
Yeah.
Like CIM operating system.
Yeah.
Some do not, like Win32 bias.
Yeah. So CIM underscore bias and Win32 underscore bias underneath are more or less exactly the same class. The CIM one is the original definition. The Win32 one is the Microsoft possibly changed definition of the class. As far as I can see, I haven't come across anything where the two are actually different. Just part of the Microsoft, we're going to do it different because we're Microsoft, like they were back in the 1990s. So if we look at pulling back CIM instance, that took 31 milliseconds. Pulling the whole thing back is 31 milliseconds. And if you pull the property back, that goes down to 16. And the one that I just realized isn't in there. And it wouldn't be complete if we didn't do this. That's 12 milliseconds, which is interesting. So this time difference is, in reality, while the differences are minor, it's going to depend on exactly what you're doing, and it's probably not worth worrying about that much. Okay, CIM sessions. CIM sessions give you an analogous setup to the remoting sessions, PowerShell remoting. So you can create a connection to a remote machine. You can then run multiple CIM commands across that, and you don't keep have to set up the connection and drop the connection like you do if you just use the computer name. So it's exactly the same idea as remoting. So, as I said, the default is for CIM sessions to use WSMan, exactly the same as PowerShell remoting does. However, there is a slight issue with that. So if we create some sessions, and what I've done in the first one is I've created an option to use the DCOM protocol instead of WSMan. So this session, the DCOM, $DCOM, I'm creating a CIM session out to this machine using the session option and the protocol DCOM. This is just creating a default session to that computer, which will use WSMan. And you can see that when you look at the wonderful data that you get returned from these things. All it tells you really is the computer name and the protocol you're using. Now, if we try to run those, what's actually happening, and it's actually, let me run them separate and then you can see it. So the default one runs. The DCOM one, sorry, the default one fails. The DCOM one runs. That's because you're going to a Windows 2008 R2 box. And if you look at the WSMan stack on that box, you can see that it says stack 2. That's WSMan version 2. Anything that is PowerShell 3 and above is version 3 and above. So if you try to run a WSMan-based CIM session to a WSMan 2 box, it will fail. But there's a trick. If you do this, it works. What I've done is put in a filter, just saying that the caption is there. So that fails. But if you put the filter in, it works. I've never had a satisfactory answer, and the first time we showed the PowerShell team this at a deep dive, they were going, we didn't know that. What I think is happening, and I only looked at this today, what I think is happening is if we look at the default, right, it's trying to enumerate the CIM instances. Whereas if you use the caption, it actually runs a query. And I think that's the difference. If you use the filter, it's just sending a query which runs. If you just send the request to get the operating system, the class information back, then it's trying to enumerate those instances, and that's where the WS-man clash comes and it all falls apart. But that's conjecture. I need to do some more testing on that because it only occurred to me to look at that while I was setting this up. So it may be incorrect, but I think that's at the bottom of it. Okay, so that's the basics of the commandlets and some issues around one of the issues around the CIM sessions, the main issue. So. Have we got in the, no, that's sorry, I'm jumping ahead. There. So we've done demo 1. PowerShell, I don't know what he's doing with that. I think he's got the wrong, that was left over from his previous one. Okay, so there's a couple of things. CIM sessions, exactly as the remoting can work against multiple systems. So I showed you there creating a CIM session against a single machine. You can just give a list of computer names, and you'll create CIM sessions out to each of them. But the important thing is that CIM sessions can survive reboots, which I will show you, hopefully. So let's take Jaap's demo was going to be against his Azure environment. As I don't have one, that was going to be difficult to duplicate, so I've just basically rewritten this against my environment. I've left his code in so you can see what he was doing. So I'm creating a CIM session out to this machine, and I'm creating a PowerShell remoting session out to the same machine. I can run get CIM instance using that, and I can use invoke command and the remote session. And we get the same information back as you would expect. We'll restart the VM. Demos are brutal on virtual machines. And that's now running. It came back so quick because it's a nano server. I tell you what, nano servers are going to be brilliant for demos where you need to reboot things in a hurry. So we'll try the CIM instance again. If you fail, you're going in the bin. You really are. So it was obviously just needed a few seconds to reconnect. So the CIM session has survived. Will the remoting session survive? No. Correct. And if you look at them, the remoting session returns that it's broken. So the session is broken because it's rebooted. So CIM sessions will survive. Remoting sessions won't survive. One other slight issue: a decom-based a decom-based SIM session, if you reboot the remote machine, it will come back some of the time. And it's a bit unpredictable as to whether it comes back or not. Yeah. My recommendation is if you're using a decom-based SIM session and you reboot the remote machine, recreate the session. That's guaranteed to work. Any questions? So I'm going through this at a fair rate, and if you have got questions, then jump in with them. We've done that. Okay. SIM classes, WMI classes, have properties and methods the same as a .NET class. Invoking those methods, you've got a number of ways of doing it. These slides are wrong. That shouldn't be get SIM instance. You can use the WMI class type accelerator. You can use get WMI object to get a copy of the instance and call the methods on that. You can use invoke WMI method, or you can use invoke SIM method. You cannot use get SIM instance to create an object representing that class and invoke the methods on it, because it's an inert object and it doesn't have the methods, and it will just go, yeah, not talking to you, don't want to play, sulk. So let's have a quick look at some of these methods of using methods. So we'll look at we'll create a session out to that. This is just a Windows 12 R2 machine, so it will behave itself. And what I'm going to do is just create some shares just as an example of how you do this. So we'll see what's there, and let me jump down. Sorry, I thought I'd run that. That's better. So we got some shares. We've got the usual admin $, and the IPC share, and standard is just a share that I created. That was part of the DSC demo I did on Sunday. So those are the sort of hidden standard admin shares. Type 0 is a file system share. That's one thing the SIM commandlets haven't fixed is this thing in WMI where types of objects are referred to by numbers. It's absolutely painful. All you can do with it is either go to the documentation, assuming you can find any. If you're working with the classes in root SIM v2, you should be okay. I think most of those are documented. If you're working outside of that namespace, good luck. You.
It's not any better than it was in the past.
Pardon?
It's not any better than it was in the past.
Even the stuff that they're creating, the new stuff they're creating that they're putting in Windows 8 and above, things like all of the network modules, the DNS server management modules, they're all created as CDXML files, which means that they've taken the SIM class, wrapped it in some XML, and published it as a PowerShell module. And it's very clever, and it's quite simple XML. What it means is that if they've got something that they need to manage, they can create the SIM provider and the SIM classes, and the because of the new API, it's much easier to do that. They can then use those CIM classes to generate PowerShell commandlets, so you've got your automation engine method of administrating it. And then you can lay a GUI either directly on top of the commandlets or even directly on top of the classes, and you can manage it as well that way. So you get the GUI and the commandlets both coming down to the same set of classes to manage it. So this is an example of using WMI class. Do you all know what what a type accelerator is? Yeah? Anybody not? Okay. A type accelerator is basically something like this in square brackets, and it's a shortcut to a .NET class. So what you're doing is, remember I showed you it was a system.management object type. What you're doing is shortcutting that as WMI class to get to the particular class, and then you can call the create method on it. And that's created a share, and it's all working very nicely. It's just a little bit archaic and arcane. The WMI accelerators were introduced in PowerShell 1 as a way to get around some of these issues. They've really not been used that much since, because the commandlets have taken over and they give you better methods of doing this. They're still there. There's no news about them being pulled out of PowerShell, and they would probably break a lot of early scripts if they did. So I can't see that happening in the near future. But because there's better ways of doing things, they have been ignored, I think is the best word, by the community. You can put the server name in to access it directly. And you can actually, what's that doing? Oh, there's a couple of other parameters in there, like setting a description. So you can see that this one has a description. Right. A much easier way is to use invoke WMI method. However, don't you just love that? You have to give these arguments, and if you're not using any particular argument, you have to tell the commandlet that argument is actually null, which means you've got to go off and find the information about the method from somewhere, either the documentation or getSim class, which I'll show you in a second. There is another issue with invoke WMI method in that the documentation will give you a list of property names. The method, invoke WMI method expects those parameter names to be in alphabetical order, the same as anything with .NET. So if you look at the documentation, just double check the order that is giving you the parameters in, because you will get errors thrown if the documentation doesn't list the parameters of the method in alphabetical order. The safest way to do it is to use getSim class and actually investigate the parameters for the method. So you can see here that would be access, description, the maximum allowed. It would have been just as easy to put 0 in there. The name, password, the path, and the type. Type 0 is a standard file system share.
So this is a question of position.
Yeah. So you've got to get the parameters for the method in the right position that the commandlet is expecting, not the position that the documentation gives you. Now, sometimes the documentation does list them in alphabetical order, and sometimes it doesn't. The classic ones are the registry provider. The key, the subkey and the subkey value or subkey name and subkey value are the ones that are round the wrong order in the documentation. Sorry, you had a question.
No, so probably you will have the same problems with, like, very often in PowerShell. So if some of the value you want to put in there is by accident an array, so
Yeah.
you will probably spill out like wrong positions.
Yeah. So the safest way to invoke methods, and probably the easiest way to understand, is to use invoke CIM method. Because for that, you create a hash, what in fact is a hash table.
You can do splatting.
And you can do splatting, and you're basically giving the parameter name and its value. At that point, there is no confusion. It knows that that is the description, so it has to be a string to go with that. If you get the type wrong, then yeah, it's going to go wrong. You can't say description equals 0 or something like that. Be careful with numeric values. Most numeric values in CIM and WMI are unsigned integers. You know the difference between a signed integer and an unsigned integer? Anybody not? Excellent. And the other thing is that when you're running WMI methods, if you get a return value of 0, everything is fine. If that is anything but 0, it's gone wrong. And trying to track down why it's gone wrong gets very interesting. Guess what? The documentation's not there. And then that's our set of shares. So you've got a number of methods of accessing the methods on, or a number of ways of accessing the methods on the CIM classes. My recommendation really is the use invoke CIM method. It's the easiest one not to get wrong. Let's get rid of those. And kill those off. Right. The title of the talk was CIM, WMI, and OMI. We've covered CIM and WMI looked at some of the nasty parts of it. Does everybody know what OMI is? WMI is the Windows management infrastructure, CIM is the common information model, and OMI is the open management infrastructure. I think it's infrastructure. It's a lightweight CIM server but Microsoft build in conjunction with the Open Group. You can download it from the Open Group website. It installs on Linux. So you can run WMI against Linux, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to create a CIM session. Notice my very strong password. Okay, and 10.10.54.70 is that, which is, I think you'd all agree that's a Linux box. It's actually an Arista network switch which runs on top of Linux. But once you've got that built, you can do most things. Apart from this, you can't use wildcards in getSim class. There's a bug somewhere in either in getSim class or in OMI that nobody's actually tracked down to know why that fails. So you need to actually specifically work with the classes. But you can get the class, You can get the properties, you can get the methods, and you can work with it just as you can with any other object. You can look at specific data. Which is, in this case, it's the Ethernet ports. That is great, but there's an easy way of doing it. And it's this network switch manager module that is available in WMF5. Be careful if you are using anything but the RTM version of WMF5, because it's known as network switch in that module, in those versions. They renamed it in the RTM and didn't tell anybody. So when I was looking for this particular thing, I was getting nowhere very rapidly. So you can use these commandlets over a CIM session, and you can do the usual things with them. You can get the global data, etc., etc., etc. And you can look at the ports. You can disable ports. You notice that the enable state changes to 3. You can re-enable it, and then you can frighten the living daylights out of your network administrators when you go back to work and tell them that they showed us how to manage the network switches with WMI. And just watch the color drain out of their faces. It's great to do to them. Yeah. OMI and the classes to manage switches are available in Arista switches, which are mainly a soft switch you can download and play with. The one I'm using is actually a free download. You can download it yourself, and it comes down as a VMware virtual machine. You can convert it to Hyper-V if you use Hyper-V. And you can sort of experiment with this stuff quite easily. And you can, as a demo to explain going to a Linux box, it's quite a good one. The commandlets are, you remember I mentioned that you can take the class and wrap them in CDXML. Let's see if we can. Swore they were. That's bizarre. I thought they were. They're not. That surprises me. I think what they've done is they've actually taken it a stage further, and they've actually published. That's cheating. That is really cheating. What they've done is they've taken the CIM class, wrapped it in the XML to create a CDXML file, and I'll show you what they look like. Because those. So you'll see files like this, and that's what it looks like. I think what they've done is taken it, produced that, and then taken the functions that produces and bundled them up to make the module. That is cheating. I will complain about that. But CDXML, there's a lot of all of the networking stuff is based on that. The DNS server administration stuff is based on that. I think the DHCP server administration stuff is based on that. There's about 2/3 of the commandlets in Server 2012 and 2012 R2 are based on this method of creating commandlets. I've got some demos of using these that I've done at previous summits. They're on the PowerShell.org YouTube channel. I've done one on the registry, one on disks, and I think I've done one on services somewhere. That is the end of the demos, as we're just coming up to 5 o'clock. So we looked at the positional arguments, the different ways of invoking methods, and how you can work with remote machines. If you want to grab a coffee and stay here to enjoy the next presentation, please feel free. You'll have a long wait because it's at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And again, I'm not going to be in a breakout room until tomorrow. I will be around all day tomorrow up until about mid-afternoon. I need to get the flight back home. In the meantime, any questions on what you've seen? Any questions on this? If you think of anything overnight, please don't ring me and wake me up and ask me.
Which room are you in?
I don't know. Wherever I fall asleep. And but I will be around, say, in the morning and the first part of the afternoon if you've got questions about any of this or any general WMI and CIM questions. Thank you very much. It was a little bit disorganized. I apologize for that, but I only found out I was doing this after I'd finished my 2 sessions this morning, so it's been a little bit of a rush to get this converted and up and running to do this for you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening.